You think you're smarter than me? The ruler came down with surprising force across 16-year-old Elijah's back. All because he dared to correct his teacher's mathematical error. What happens when a Harvard professor discovers a black janitor secretly solving complex equations that even his graduate students can't crack? A boy with extraordinary talent, working night shifts to support his family, hiding his pain from a world that tried to silence his brilliance. I set a trap, Dr. Harrington revealed. That problem contained a subtle error that would lead any solver down an incorrect path. When I found not only the error corrected but the entire approach reconceptualized, I had to meet my phantom mathematician. But will this chance encounter be enough to overcome years of discrimination and abuse? Or will the academic elite close ranks to keep Elijah in his place? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now. Subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The fluorescent lights flickered as Elijah Jackson wiped down the last empty desk in the Harvard mathematics department. At 16, he was younger than most of the university's janitorial staff, but he had lied about his age to get the job. His family needed the money too desperately for him to care about breaking rules. Almost done, Mr. Jackson, called Mr. Peterson, the night supervisor. Yes, sir. Just finishing up classroom 305, Elijah replied, his voice echoing in the empty room. Wincing, he straightened his back. The pain shot through him like electricity, a constant reminder of that day in Ms. Whitley's class. 3 months had passed, but the humiliation and physical pain remained. Once Mr. Peterson's footsteps faded down the hallway, Elijah set his mop aside and approached the whiteboard. It was covered with complex equations from an advanced calculus lecture. His eyes devoured the symbols, his mind automatically processing the mathematical language that spoke to him more clearly than English ever had. There was an error in the professor's work. Third line from the bottom. Elijah glanced at the door, then picked up a marker. He couldn't help himself. Mathematics was the one place where he could forget the pain, forget that his mother was working 2 jobs, forget that his little brother Marcus needed new shoes for school. His hand moved swiftly, correcting the error and continuing the solution. The numbers and symbols flowed from him naturally, like breathing. When he finished, he stared at his work, a brief moment of pride warming his chest before reality crashed back. He quickly erased his additions. He needed this job. If they caught him vandalizing a professor's work, he'd be fired immediately. On his way out, Elijah grabbed an abandoned textbook from the recycling bin, Advanced Theories in Topological Mathematics. Another treasure for his collection under the loose floorboard in the tiny bedroom he shared with Marcus. The night bus was nearly empty as Elijah headed home. He opened the rescued textbook, losing himself in the elegant proofs until the pain in his back forced him to shift positions. Ms. Whitley's ruler had struck with surprising force for such a petite woman. You think you're smarter than me, she had hissed that day, after he'd dared to point out her mistake on the quadratic formula. The memory made him close the book. He looked out at the passing streets instead, at the contrast between Harvard's manicured campus and the gradually deteriorating neighborhoods as the bus headed toward his home. By the time he reached his apartment building, it was past midnight. He crept inside quietly, not wanting to wake his mother, who would be up at 4 a.m. for her morning shift at the hospital cafeteria. But Sophia Jackson was still awake, sewing patches onto Marcus's school uniform at the kitchen table. You should be asleep, Mom, Elijah said, setting his backpack down. Just finishing up, she said, her eyes tired but her smile warm. How was work? Fine, he answered, not mentioning the mathematical equations or the dull ache in his back. I'll make you some tea. As the kettle boiled, Elijah did mental calculations about their finances. His paycheck, plus his mother's 2 jobs, minus rent, utilities, food. The numbers weren't adding up to anything good. We'll be okay, his mother said, reading his expression. God provides. Elijah nodded, though his faith wasn't in God but in numbers. Numbers were reliable. Numbers didn't discriminate or make false promises. In a world that had rarely been fair to people who looked like him, mathematics was the one realm where truth was absolute. "I know, Mom," he said, and served her tea before heading to bed, where complex equations would dance in his dreams, offering solutions to problems far simpler than those of real life. 3 months earlier, Elijah sat in the back row of Ms. Eleanor Whitley's advanced mathematics class at Dorchester High. He preferred the back not out of disinterest, but because it allowed him to solve additional problems in his notebook while Ms. Whitley taught material he'd mastered years ago. "Today, we'll be discussing quadratic equations," Ms. Whitley announced, her voice carrying authority despite her small stature. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her pearl necklace perfectly matching her cream-colored blouse. Elijah respectfully closed his notebook. Though he'd been solving quadratics since 7th grade, his mother had raised him to show respect to teachers. Ms. Whitley wrote an equation on the board: 2x superscript 2 plus 7x, 15 is equal to 0. "Who can tell me how to find the roots using the quadratic formula?" she asked. The usual hands shot up: Jessica Pearson, Thomas Wheeler, the students from the wealthy parts of Boston who had private tutors and parents with college degrees. Elijah kept his head down. Ms. Whitley started writing out the solution: x equals b plus or minus square root b superscript 2 for ac slash 2a. But as she worked through the problem, Elijah noticed a mistake. She had written b plus or minus square root b superscript 2 for ac slash a, missing the division by 2. Elijah hesitated. Correcting teachers hadn't gone well for him in the past. But mathematics was sacred to him. Truth mattered. He raised his hand. Ms. Whitley's eyebrows rose in surprise. Elijah rarely participated. "Yes, Mr. Jackson." "Excuse me, Ms. Whitley," he said quietly, "but I think there's an error in the formula. The denominator should be 2a, not just a dot." The classroom fell silent. Jessica Pearson turned to stare at him, her eyes wide with shock that someone would challenge Ms. Whitley, who had taught at the prestigious school for 20 years. "I beg your pardon." Ms. Whitley's voice was ice cold. "The formula," Elijah repeated, his confidence wavering. "It's supposed to be divided by 2a, not just a." Ms. Whitley's face tightened. "Are you suggesting that I, with my master's degree in mathematics education, don't know the quadratic formula?" "No, ma'am, I just..." "Stand up, Mr. Jackson." Elijah stood, aware of every eye on him. "Come to the board. Show us all your superior knowledge." His heart pounding, Elijah walked to the front. He took the marker she thrust at him and correctly wrote the formula. Ms. Whitley examined his work, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, to Elijah's surprise, she checked her textbook. Her face flushed when she confirmed he was right. Rather than acknowledge her mistake, she snapped, "Sit down, Mr. Jackson. And see me after class." Elijah returned to his seat, his classmates' stares burning into his back. After class, Ms. Whitley ordered him to lean over her desk. "Think you're smarter than everyone else?" she hissed, ruler in hand. "Need to show off? Let's see if this helps you remember your place." The ruler came down on his lower back with surprising force, once, twice, 3 times. Elijah bit his lip to keep from crying out, his eyes watering with pain and humiliation. "If you ever disrupt my class again, it'll be worse," she warned. "I've already spoken to Principal Davis about your behavioral issues." "Behavioral issues?" Elijah was bewildered. "I've never been in trouble." "That's not what my report will say. Now get out." That evening, when his mother asked about the bruises while doing laundry, Elijah claimed he'd fallen during basketball practice. He couldn't bear to add to her burdens. The next day, Ms. Whitley announced a seating reassignment. Elijah was placed in the front row, directly under her watchful eye. When he tried to sit, the pain was so intense he had to stand back up. "Is there a problem, Mr. Jackson?" Ms. Whitley asked, her voice sweet with false concern. "No, ma'am," he replied, and forced himself to sit, enduring the pain that would become chronic. a daily reminder of what happened when someone like him dared to be right when an authority figure was wrong. 2 months into his job at Harvard, Elijah discovered a sanctuary. Room 204 in the mathematics building was always empty after 11 p.m., and the night security guard, Mr. Washington, conveniently took his coffee break at 11:15, leaving the hallway unpatrolled for 30 minutes. It was all the time Elijah needed. Tonight, the whiteboard in room 204 contained a series of partial differential equations that made Elijah's heart race with excitement. Dr. Victor Harrington's name was written in the corner, the famous mathematician whose textbooks Elijah had devoured from the library. The problem appeared to be part of a lecture on advanced wave propagation theories. Elijah recognized it from a paper he'd read online using the free computers at the public library. He set down his cleaning supplies and approached the board. The pain in his back flared as he reached for the marker, a ghostly echo of Ms. Whitley's ruler. He shifted his posture, finding the position that hurt least, and began to work. Numbers and symbols flowed from his mind through his fingers. The elegance of mathematics temporarily erased his physical discomfort. Here, solving complex equations left by doctoral candidates and legendary professors, Elijah found freedom. No one judged him by his age, his skin color, or his worn-out clothes. "You've overlooked the boundary conditions," he muttered to himself, addressing the absent professor as he extended the solution. "The wave function collapses here, but if you apply Schrödinger's approach instead." His marker moved rapidly, adding steps that transformed the incomplete proof into something more elegant, more comprehensive. When he finished, he stepped back to admire his work, a momentary pride washing over him before reality returned. This time, he didn't erase his additions. Something in him wanted to be seen, even if anonymously. He carefully placed the marker back exactly as he'd found it and returned to his janitorial cart. By the time Mr. Washington returned from his break, Elijah was dusting the bookshelves in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything all right, son?" Mr. Washington asked. The older man had always been kind to Elijah, one of the few people at Harvard who bothered to see him as more than invisible help. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied. "Just finishing up." Mr. Washington nodded, but his eyes lingered on Elijah with something like curiosity. "You know," he said casually, "I was a pretty good student in my day. Especially in math. Never got the chance for college though." Elijah paused in his dusting. "Why not?" The security guard shrugged. "Life. Responsibilities. No money. The usual obstacles for folks from our neighborhood." He adjusted his cap. "But times are changing. More opportunities now, if you know where to look." Elijah nodded noncommittally, unwilling to reveal his secret academic pursuits. Later that night, as Elijah cleaned the mathematics department's communal kitchen, he overheard 2 graduate students discussing the mysterious solutions appearing on Dr. Harrington's boards. "It happened again," said one, a young woman with braided hair. "Someone solved that wave propagation problem Harrington left up, and took it 3 steps further." "Probably Williams showing off again," her companion replied, referring to a notorious overachiever in the doctoral program. "Williams is in Switzerland for that conference. Besides, the handwriting's different." "Maybe Harrington himself, then." The woman shook her head. "He's baffled too. Started calling it the phantom mathematician." Elijah kept his head down, fighting a smile as he wiped the counters. The phantom mathematician. He liked that. Over the next few weeks, Elijah grew bolder. He began leaving solutions to problems in multiple classrooms, always careful to time his mathematical explorations during the security guard's break or when the floor was empty. One night, he found a problem so challenging it took him 3 consecutive nights to solve. It was a beautiful puzzle involving non-Euclidean geometry applications to quantum field theory, well beyond undergraduate level. As he worked through the final steps, his back pain momentarily forgotten in the thrill of mathematical discovery, he failed to notice the time. Mr. Washington's break had ended 15 minutes ago. And down the hall, a door opened. Heavy footsteps approached room 204. Elijah froze, marker in hand, brilliant solution half completed on the board. His heart pounded as the footsteps stopped just outside the door. The handle turned. Elijah scrambled for his cleaning supplies, but it was too late. The door swung open, revealing a tall, distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair and intense eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Victor Harrington himself stared at Elijah, then at the complex mathematical solution on the board. "Who are you?" the professor demanded. "And what the hell are you doing with my equation?" Dr. Victor Harrington had spent 20 years at Harvard establishing himself as one of the world's preeminent mathematicians. His work on geometric topology had earned him the Fields Medal, mathematics' highest honor. He was not a man accustomed to being confused. Yet confusion was exactly what he'd felt over the past month, as mysterious additions appeared on his classroom boards overnight. At first, he'd suspected Williams, brilliant but insufferable, exactly the type to show off anonymously. But Williams was in Switzerland. Then he'd suspected colleagues playing an elaborate prank. Now, standing in his classroom at midnight, he found himself facing what appeared to be a teenage custodian with a whiteboard marker in hand. "I'm waiting for an explanation," Harrington said, his voice stern. Elijah's mind raced. "I was cleaning, sir." Harrington's eyes moved from Elijah's face to the complex equations on the board. "With differential equations?" "I'm sorry," Elijah said, setting down the marker. "I'll erase it." "Stop." Harrington held up his hand. He approached the board, studying the solution. His eyebrows rose incrementally as he followed the elegant mathematical reasoning. "You did this?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Elijah nodded, preparing himself for accusations of vandalism, for losing his desperately needed job. But Harrington was still examining the mathematics. "This approach," he muttered. "I've been wrestling with this problem for weeks. You've used a completely novel application of Riemann surfaces to resolve the boundary value issue." He turned to face Elijah. "Who are you? One of the undergraduate prodigies? You look young even for that." "No, sir. I work here. Custodial staff." Harrington's brow furrowed. "What's your name?" "Elijah Jackson, sir." "And you have no formal mathematical training?" "No, sir. Just books. And the internet, when I can get to the library." Harrington looked genuinely perplexed. "How old are you, Mr. Jackson?" 16, Elijah admitted, abandoning the lie he told to get the job. The professor's eyes widened slightly. He glanced back at the board, then at Elijah again. "You're the one who's been leaving solutions on my boards. The phantom mathematician my students have been gossiping about." It wasn't a question, but Elijah nodded anyway. "Why?" Elijah shifted uncomfortably, his back twinging with pain. "The problems, they're interesting. I can't help solving them when I see them." Harrington studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Jackson, do you realize what you've done here? This particular application has implications for quantum computing that." He trailed off, then appeared to make a decision. "Wait here," he commanded, and left the room. Elijah considered fleeing, but where would he go? His family needed his income. Instead, he stood awkwardly by the board, wondering if his mathematical midnight adventures were about to cost him everything. Minutes later, Harrington returned with a notebook. He opened it and wrote a new problem on a separate section of the whiteboard. "Solve this," he said. Elijah studied the equation, recognizing it as a problem in complex analysis. He picked up the marker hesitantly. "Go on," Harrington urged. Elijah began working through the problem, the familiar calm of mathematical reasoning settling over him. When he finished, he stepped back. Harrington examined his work silently, then wrote another, more difficult problem. Elijah solved that too, more confidently this time. After the fifth problem, a notoriously difficult one from a recent international mathematical Olympiad, Harrington set down his notebook. "Extraordinary," he murmured, almost to himself. Simply extraordinary. He fixed Elijah with an intense gaze. Where did you learn this level of mathematics? Everywhere, sir. Library books. Discarded textbooks. Online lectures when I can access them. Elijah hesitated, then continued. I sometimes take notes during lectures here, when I'm cleaning empty classrooms. Instead of anger, Harrington's expression showed growing fascination. And you work here as night custodial assistant. 3 nights a week, plus weekends. While attending Dorchester High School, sir. I see. Harrington checked his watch. It's late. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Be in this classroom at 4 p.m. I have school until 3:15, sir. And I need to help my brother get home. 5 p.m., then. My shift starts at 7, sir. Harrington nodded. 5 p.m. Don't be late, Mr. Jackson. And don't worry about your job. I'll speak with facilities management. After the professor left, Elijah stood motionless in the empty classroom, marker still in hand, wondering if he'd just ruined everything or if, somehow, his life was about to change. Elijah arrived at room 204 at precisely 5 p.m. the following day, his heart pounding. He'd barely slept, anticipating this meeting, oscillating between hope and dread. His mother had noticed his distraction at breakfast. Everything okay, baby? She'd asked. Yes, ma'am, he'd answered automatically. Just thinking about a math problem. Now, as he knocked on the classroom door, he wondered if he should have told her the truth. But what was the truth? That he'd been caught solving equations he had no business understanding. That a Harvard professor wanted to see him for reasons he couldn't fathom. Enter, came Dr. Harrington's voice. Elijah opened the door to find not just Dr. Harrington, but 3 other people, an older white man with a stern expression, a younger black man in a crisp suit, and a middle-aged woman with glasses and a clipboard. Mr. Jackson, Dr. Harrington said formally. Thank you for coming. These are my colleagues, Dr. Wilson, chair of the mathematics department, Dr. Washington, one of our assistant professors, and Ms. Chen from the admissions office. Elijah nodded nervously, suddenly conscious of his worn sneakers and the frayed cuffs of his only decent shirt. Please, sit down, Dr. Harrington indicated a chair positioned in front of the small group. It reminded Elijah uncomfortably of being called to the principal's office. Dr. Wilson spoke first. Mr. Jackson, Dr. Harrington has made some extraordinary claims about your mathematical abilities. We're here to verify them. With all due respect, Dr. Washington interjected, we need to establish some facts first. He turned to Elijah with a kinder expression. How old are you, son? 16, sir. And you work here as part of the night custodial staff, sir. I help clean the mathematics and physics buildings. While attending high school during the day? Yes, sir. Dorchester High. Dr. Wilson frowned. And you have no formal advanced mathematical training? No, sir. Dr. Wilson exchanged skeptical glances with Ms. Chen. Dr. Harrington suggests you've been solving postgraduate level mathematics problems. That seems improbable. Elijah remained silent, unsure how to respond. His back began to ache from sitting straight in the hard chair. Dr. Harrington cleared his throat. Perhaps a demonstration would be more convincing than discussion. He stood and wrote a complex equation on the board. Mr. Jackson, would you care to approach this problem? Elijah stood, wincing slightly as his back protested. He took the offered marker and studied the equation. It was challenging, involving fractional calculus, but nothing he couldn't handle. He began writing, losing himself in the familiar comfort of mathematics. When he finished several minutes later, he became aware of the silence in the room. Dr. Washington was leaning forward, his expression surprised. Ms. Chen was writing rapidly on her clipboard. Dr. Wilson's eyebrows had nearly disappeared into his hairline. That's Correct, Dr. Wilson said, his tone suggesting he still couldn't quite believe it. But this is a memorized solution, surely. Victor, give him something original. Dr. Harrington smiled slightly and wrote another problem on the board. This is actually something I've been working on myself. I don't have a complete solution yet. Elijah studied the new problem, his mind immediately identifying possible approaches. As he worked, he was vaguely aware of the professor's whispering behind him. Where did you learn mathematics at this level, Mr. Jackson? Dr. Washington asked when Elijah finished. Books, sir. The internet. And. He hesitated. Sometimes I stay after cleaning to listen outside lecture halls. You've never had a formal teacher? A mentor? Ms. Chen asked. Elijah thought of Ms. Whitley and suppressed a shudder. No, ma'am. Remarkable, Dr. Washington murmured. Dr. Wilson still looked skeptical. Young man, you understand this is highly unusual. A custodial worker with no formal training solving postgraduate level mathematics. You must see why we're finding this difficult to accept. The words stung, but they weren't unfamiliar. Elijah had long understood that people like him weren't expected to excel in fields like mathematics. I understand, sir, he said quietly. I think we've seen enough for today, Dr. Harrington interrupted. Mr. Jackson needs to prepare for his shift, and we have much to discuss. He turned to Elijah. Thank you for coming. Please continue your work as usual. I'll be in touch. As Elijah left, he heard Dr. Wilson say, Victor, this is unprecedented. Even if the boy has talent, there are procedures, requirements. The door closed behind him, cutting off the rest of the conversation. Elijah stood in the empty hallway, uncertain whether he'd just glimpsed an opening door of opportunity or merely provided an afternoon's entertainment for bored academics. For a week, Elijah heard nothing from Dr. Harrington. He continued his custodial duties, no longer daring to solve equations on the boards. The uncertainty weighed on him, his mind constantly replaying the meeting, analyzing the professor's expressions, Ms. Chen's notes. On Friday night, as he was mopping the hallway outside room 204, Dr. Harrington emerged from his office. Mr. Jackson, he called. I've been looking for you. Elijah set his mop aside. Yes, sir. Come with me, please. Elijah followed the professor into his office, a space he'd cleaned many times but never entered while its occupant was present. Books lined every wall, and papers covered every surface, mathematical symbols spilling across them like a cryptic language only a select few could read. Sit down, Dr. Harrington said, clearing a stack of journals from a chair. Elijah sat gingerly, his back protesting. Are you in pain? Dr. Harrington asked, noticing his discomfort. It's nothing, sir. The professor studied him for a moment, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Mr. Jackson, Elijah, I've spent the past week investigating you. I hope you don't mind. Elijah tensed. Investigating, sir. Your academic record. Your family situation. Your incident with Ms. Whitley at Dorchester High. Elijah froze. How did you? I have colleagues who teach in the Boston public school system, Dr. Harrington explained. When I mentioned your name, one remembered the incident. Ms. Whitley claimed you were disruptive and disrespectful. My colleague had doubts about her version of events. It doesn't matter now, sir, Elijah said quietly. I think it does, Dr. Harrington replied. Especially if her actions resulted in your current physical discomfort. Elijah remained silent. Dr. Harrington sighed. Let me be direct. You have an extraordinary mathematical gift. It would be a terrible waste, not just for you but for the field of mathematics, if that gift went undeveloped. I don't understand, sir. I'm offering to mentor you, Elijah. Privately, outside of the traditional academic channels, for now. Elijah stared at him, unable to process what he was hearing. There are obstacles, of course, Dr. Harrington continued. Dr. Wilson and the administration have concerns about liability, about precedent, about a dozen other bureaucratic matters. But I've secured permission to work with you unofficially, provided you continue your high school education. Mentor me? Like, teach me mathematics. More than that. Guide you through the higher realms of mathematical theory. Help you develop your own ideas. Prepare you for a future in this field. Elijah's mind raced. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Why? He asked finally. Why? Dr. Harrington repeated, seeming surprised by the question. Why would you do this for me? You don't know me. I'm just. Elijah gestured at his custodial uniform. Dr. Harrington leaned forward. Do you know much about the history of mathematics, Elijah? Some, sir. Then you might know that many of the greatest mathematicians came from humble beginnings. Ramanujan was a clerk in India with no formal training when Hardy discovered him. Newton was the son of an illiterate farmer. The beauty of mathematics is that it cares nothing for your background, your skin color, or your economic status. It only cares about the mind that engages with it. He tapped the folder. I'm offering this because you have one of the most naturally gifted mathematical minds I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. And because I believe talent like yours deserves nurturing, regardless of circumstance. Elijah sat in stunned silence. Finally, he asked, what would this involve, exactly? We'd meet 3 times a week, for 2 hours before your custodial shift. I'd provide materials, problems to solve, guidance on your ideas. Eventually, we might collaborate on original research. And my job? Your employment remains secure. In fact, I've arranged for your hours to be slightly reduced without affecting your pay, to accommodate our sessions. Elijah thought of his mother, of the bills piling up on their kitchen table, of Marcus needing new glasses. I can't accept charity, sir, he said firmly. Dr. Harrington smiled slightly. This isn't charity, Elijah. Consider it an investment in mathematical progress. And if it helps, you can earn your keep by helping me grade undergraduate papers. Elijah hesitated, still unable to believe this was happening. What if I'm not as good as you think? What if I disappoint you? That's not mathematically probable, given what I've already seen, Dr. Harrington replied. But even if you were merely very good rather than exceptional, you would still deserve this opportunity. He held out his hand. Do we have an agreement? Elijah looked at the offered hand, then back at Dr. Harrington's face. He saw no condescension there, no pity, only genuine academic interest and something that might almost be excitement. Slowly, he extended his own hand. Yes, sir. We do. As they shook hands, Elijah couldn't help asking one more question. Sir, what made you come back to your classroom that night? How did you catch me? Dr. Harrington smiled. I set a trap, Elijah. That problem on wave propagation. It contained a subtle error that would lead any solver down an elegant but ultimately incorrect path. When I found not only the error corrected but the entire approach reconceptualized, well, I had to meet my phantom mathematician. For the first time in months, Elijah felt himself smile, a real smile, born not from politeness but from genuine joy. Now, Dr. Harrington said, pulling out a fresh notebook, let's begin with a discussion of your approach to that boundary value problem. I'm particularly interested in how you arrived at using Riemann surfaces. Dr. Wilson paced the length of the department conference room, his bow tie slightly askew, a sure sign of agitation. Victor, this is completely unprecedented. The boy has no qualifications, no academic record to speak of. Dr. Harrington remained seated, outwardly calm though inwardly seething. This was the third emergency meeting Wilson had called in 2 weeks about Elijah. James, we've been over this. Elijah Jackson has demonstrated mathematical abilities that surpass many of our doctoral candidates. In controlled environments, with you present, Dr. Wilson countered. Who's to say he's not simply regurgitating formulas he's memorized? Or that you're not, helping him along. Dr. Washington, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Having observed Mr. Jackson myself, I can attest that his understanding goes well beyond memorization. His intuitive grasp of complex concepts is remarkable. Be that as it may, Wilson continued, there are protocols, standards. Harvard doesn't simply pluck janitors from the hallways and turn them into mathematicians. Perhaps it should, if the janitors in question are solving theoretical problems that have stumped our faculty, Dr. Harrington replied dryly. Ms. Chen from admissions consulted her notes. The boy's high school record is concerning. His mathematics teacher, Ms. Whitley, reports disciplinary issues, disruptive behavior. Ms. Whitley, Dr. Harrington interrupted, is the reason Elijah suffers from chronic back pain. She physically assaulted him for correcting a mathematical error she made in class. A shocked silence fell over the room. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Wilson said finally. It's a statement of fact. I've spoken with other teachers at Dorchester High who corroborated the story, though none witnessed the actual assault. Elijah was too ashamed to report it. Dr. Washington shook his head. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. Black students, especially boys, are disproportionately subjected to harsh disciplinary measures in our education system. This isn't about race, Dr. Wilson said uncomfortably. Isn't it? Dr. Washington challenged. If Elijah were a white teenager from Brookline who taught himself advanced mathematics, would we be having this conversation? Or would we be celebrating him as a prodigy? Wilson's face flushed. That's unfair, Darius. What's unfair, Dr. Harrington interjected, is that a brilliant young mathematician nearly had his potential destroyed because a teacher couldn't accept being corrected by a student, particularly a black student. He stood, gathering his papers. I've already secured permission from the dean to mentor Elijah unofficially. I'm not asking the department to admit him or grant him credentials he hasn't earned. I'm simply informing you that I intend to nurture his talent, with or without your blessing. And when your protege outgrows private tutoring? Wilson asked. What then? Will you demand we admit him without the proper prerequisites? Without even a high school diploma? Elijah will complete his high school education, Dr. Harrington assured him. As for what comes after, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I suggest we focus on not squandering a mathematical mind that comes along perhaps once in a generation. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Washington caught up with Harrington in the hallway. Victor, I'd like to help with Elijah's mentorship, he said quietly. Harrington studied the younger professor. Why? Because I was almost an Elijah myself. Not as brilliant, certainly, but a black kid who loved mathematics and faced plenty of Ms. Whitleys along the way. The difference was, I had mentors who fought for me. Elijah deserves the same. Harrington nodded slowly. He could use a role model who understands his experience in ways I never can. And frankly, I could use the support. Wilson is going to fight this every step of the way. Let him, Washington said with a determined smile. Some equations are worth solving, no matter how difficult. Later that evening, as Elijah arrived for his mentoring session, he found both professors waiting for him. Elijah, this is Dr. Washington, Harrington explained. He'll be joining our sessions occasionally. He specializes in computational topology, an area I think you'll find fascinating. Elijah nodded politely, but his expression was guarded. Is everything okay, Dr. Harrington? Did I do something wrong? Quite the opposite, Harrington assured him. Dr. Washington is here because your work has impressed him. And because sometimes, it helps to have someone in your corner who's walked a similar path. Dr. Washington smiled. Professor Harrington tells me you've been exploring Riemann surfaces. I have some thoughts on their application to quantum computing that might interest you. As the session progressed, Harrington observed a subtle change in Elijah's demeanor, the gradual relaxation of his shoulders, the increasing confidence in his questions, the spark of genuine excitement when Dr. Washington described his own journey from a public school in Detroit to a Harvard professorship. For the first time, Harrington allowed himself to believe that they might actually succeed, not just in developing Elijah's mathematical talents, but in helping him overcome the institutional barriers that had nearly silenced his brilliant mind before it had the chance to speak. "Mom, I'm home," Elijah called as he entered the small apartment. The scent of his mother's famous chicken stew filled the space, making his stomach growl. His mentoring sessions with Dr. Harrington always left him mentally exhilarated but physically drained. Sophia Jackson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Despite working a double shift at the hospital, she still managed to cook dinner for her boys. "There you are," she said, giving him a quick hug. "How was your special class?" Elijah had finally told his mother about Dr. Harrington's mentorship 2 weeks ago. He'd expected skepticism. After all, when did Harvard professors ever take interest in kids from their neighborhood? Instead, she'd listened quietly, then nodded with tears in her eyes. "God works in mysterious ways," she'd said. "I always knew your mind was special." Now, as he set his backpack down, Elijah tried to summarize the day's session. "We discussed non-Euclidean geometry applications in quantum theory. Dr. Washington thinks my approach to a particular problem might be publishable." Sophia smiled, though Elijah knew she didn't fully understand the mathematical concepts. What she understood was that her son had found his path. "Where's Marcus?" Elijah asked, noticing his little brother's absence. A shadow crossed Sophia's face. "In the bedroom. His teacher sent home a note today." Elijah frowned. "What happened?" "He got in trouble for arguing with his math teacher about some formula." "Sound familiar?" The worry in her eyes was clear. "I don't want him going through what you did, Elijah." The memory of Ms. Whitley's ruler made Elijah's back twinge. "I'll talk to him." He found his 12-year-old brother lying on their shared bed, angrily solving math problems from a worn textbook. "Heard you had some trouble at school," Elijah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Marcus scowled. "Mr. Peterson is an idiot. He said negative numbers can't have square roots. I told him about imaginary numbers, and he sent me to the principal's office for being disrespectful." Elijah sighed. The Jackson brothers, it seemed, shared both mathematical aptitude and a dangerous honesty about educators' mistakes. "Marcus, look at me," Elijah said firmly. "What happened to me with Ms. Whitley? I don't want that for you, understand? Sometimes it's better to what?" Marcus interrupted. "Pretend to be dumb. Let them teach wrong information. That's not what you do at Harvard. That's different. Dr. Harrington values truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Not all teachers do." Elijah ran a hand over his face. "Just, be more diplomatic, okay? Say, 'Excuse me, sir, I read something about imaginary numbers that might apply here. Could we discuss it after class?'" Marcus considered this. "That sounds fake." "It's not fake. It's strategic. You're not compromising the truth. You're just packaging it differently." Their conversation was interrupted by their mother calling them to dinner. As they ate, Elijah noticed how worn his mother looked. The extra shifts she'd been taking to cover Marcus's new asthma medication had left dark circles under her eyes. "How's your back today?" she asked Elijah. "Better," he lied. The truth was, the pain was constant, a permanent reminder of the cost of challenging authority. "Dr. Harrington asked about our family," Elijah said, changing the subject. "He wants to meet you." Sophia paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Me? What for?" "He says he wants to discuss my academic future with you. Something about a special program." "What kind of program?" The wariness in her voice was understandable. In their experience, authority figures rarely brought good news. "I'm not sure exactly," Elijah admitted. "But I trust him, Mom. He's different." Sophia set down her fork. "Different how?" Elijah thought about it. "He sees me. Not just what I can do with numbers, but me. And he doesn't act like it's some miracle that someone who looks like me can understand advanced mathematics." Sophia studied her eldest son. At 16, he carried responsibilities no teenager should bear, contributing to the family finances, helping raise his brother, navigating a world that often seemed determined to limit his potential. I'll meet with him, she decided. But Elijah, promise me something. What's that? Don't let Harvard make you forget where you come from. Those ivory towers can be beautiful, but they can also blind you to the world outside. I won't forget, Elijah promised. Later that night, as Marcus slept, Elijah worked on the problems Dr. Harrington had assigned. His back ached from sitting hunched over his notebook, but the equations provided a familiar comfort. In mathematics, there were rules that couldn't be broken, truths that couldn't be denied, even by those in power. Through the thin walls, he could hear his mother on the phone, trying to arrange a payment plan for their overdue electricity bill. The contrast between his daytime world at Harvard and the reality of his home life was stark. Dr. Harrington spoke of Riemann surfaces and quantum computing, while his mother worried about keeping the lights on. Elijah set aside his notebook and pulled out a blank piece of paper. On it, he began calculating, not theoretical mathematics this time, but practical arithmetic. His reduced custodial hours meant slightly less income. Marcus needed new shoes for the coming winter. The electricity bill was 3 weeks past due. The numbers didn't add up to a positive solution. Elijah leaned back, wincing as his spine protested. Dr. Harrington had opened a door to a world of pure mathematical beauty. But that world couldn't feed his family or keep their apartment warm. For the first time, Elijah wondered if his gift might prove to be both a blessing and a burden. Mrs. Jackson, thank you for coming, Dr. Harrington said, rising from his desk as Sophia entered his office. Elijah stood nervously beside his mother, acutely aware of the contrast between her worn but carefully pressed dress and the casual affluence of the Harvard campus. It's Ms. Jackson, his mother corrected gently. And thank you for making time on a Saturday. Weekdays are difficult with my work schedule. Of course. Dr. Harrington gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Please, sit down. Dr. Washington will be joining us shortly. Sophia sat with the careful dignity Elijah had always admired, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Elijah tells me you've been mentoring him in advanced mathematics. Yes, though mentoring might suggest I'm providing more guidance than I actually am. Often, I simply present problems and watch in amazement as your son solves them in ways I hadn't considered. Sophia smiled slightly. He's been that way since he was small. Counting everything, finding patterns everywhere. His kindergarten teacher said he was obsessed with numbers. A knock at the door preceded Dr. Washington's entrance. After introductions, he sat beside Dr. Harrington, facing the Jacksons. Ms. Jackson, Dr. Harrington began, we've asked you here today because we want to propose a more formal educational arrangement for Elijah. What kind of arrangement? The wariness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Harvard has a history of special admissions for exceptional students, Dr. Washington explained. Not widely publicized, but precedent. We believe Elijah qualifies for such consideration. You want him to attend Harvard? Now. Sophia looked stunned. Not exactly, Dr. Harrington clarified. We're proposing a hybrid program. Elijah would complete his high school requirements through an accredited online program, while simultaneously taking selected undergraduate mathematics courses here. This would allow him to earn dual credit, Dr. Washington added. He could potentially enter Harvard as a junior in 2 years, rather than a freshman. Sophia was silent for a moment, processing. And the cost of this program? The professors exchanged glances. There would be no cost to your family, Dr. Harrington assured her. We've secured special funding to cover all expenses, including Elijah's online high school courses. Additionally, we'd like to convert his current custodial position to a research assistantship, which would provide the same income but allow him to work in the department directly. That sounds like charity, Sophia said stiffly. Dr. Washington leaned forward. Ms. Jackson, I understand your concern. But this isn't charity, it's investment. Harvard invests millions in recruiting top talent. Elijah represents a mathematical mind that appears perhaps once in a generation. The university isn't doing him a favor, he's doing the field of mathematics a favor by developing his extraordinary gifts. Sophia turned to her son. Elijah? What do you think about all this? Elijah had been quiet, listening intently. I want to do it, Mom. But what? I'm worried about you and Marcus. The hours would be different. I might not be home as much to help. Sophia's expression softened. Elijah Jackson, you listen to me. You have carried adult responsibilities since you were 12 years old. It's time you got to focus on being a student. She turned back to the professors. My son will accept your offer, with one condition. What's that? Dr. Harrington asked. That you remember he's still a 16-year-old boy, not just a mathematical mind. He needs guidance, not just academically, but as a young man finding his way in a world that hasn't always been kind to boys who look like him. Dr. Washington nodded solemnly. I understand that responsibility, Ms. Jackson, and I take it seriously. Then we accept, Sophia said firmly. 3 weeks later, Elijah stood outside Lecture Hall B, heart pounding. It was his first official day in the program. He wore new clothes, nothing fancy, but clean and without the frayed edges of his usual wardrobe. Dr. Washington had tactfully arranged for a department store gift card as a standard part of the program package. Nervous? A voice asked. Darius Washington approached, carrying a coffee cup. A little, Elijah admitted. That's normal. I still remember my first day at MIT. I was the only black student in most of my advanced classes. How did you handle it? One day at a time. And by remembering that I belonged there as much as anyone else. He smiled. You ready to meet your classmates? Elijah nodded, took a deep breath, and followed Dr. Washington into the lecture hall. 20 faces turned to stare as they entered. Most were undergraduate students in their early 20s, though a few appeared older, graduate students, probably. Good morning, Dr. Washington addressed the class. Before Dr. Harrington arrives, I'd like to introduce Elijah Jackson. He'll be joining this seminar as part of a special advanced placement program. Murmurs swept through the room. A young woman with braided hair, Elijah recognized her as one of the graduate students he'd overheard discussing the phantom mathematician, raised her hand. Yes, Ms. Okafor. Dr. Washington acknowledged. Is this the mathematical prodigy Dr. Harrington mentioned last week? The one who solved the boundary value problem? Dr. Washington glanced at Elijah, who felt his face growing warm. Mr. Jackson has demonstrated exceptional mathematical aptitude, yes. But he's here as a student, just like the rest of you. Another student, a young man with an expensive-looking sweater, frowned. How old are you? He asked Elijah directly. 16, Elijah answered quietly. More murmurs. I'm sure you'll all make Mr. Jackson feel welcome, Dr. Washington said, with a subtle emphasis that suggested this wasn't merely a request. As Elijah took a seat, Ms. Okafor leaned over. I'm Aisha, she whispered. That solution you left on the quantum field theory problem. Brilliant. We should talk sometime. Before Elijah could respond, Dr. Harrington entered, and the class fell silent. Good morning, he said briskly. Today we'll be discussing applications of geometric topology to quantum computing, a subject on which our newest student, Mr. Jackson, has already done some intriguing preliminary work. All eyes turned to Elijah again. This time, though, he sat a little straighter. For the first time in his life, he was in a classroom where his mathematical ability wasn't something to hide or be punished for, but something to develop and celebrate. As Dr. Harrington began his lecture, Elijah opened a brand new notebook and began to take notes, his mind already racing ahead to the elegant mathematical structures being described. The pain in his back seemed less intense today, as if the weight of hiding his true self had finally begun to lift. 6 months into Harvard's special program, Elijah sat in Dr. Harrington's office, staring at his laptop screen in disbelief. He'd been working on a particular mathematical problem for weeks, an extension of his earlier work on boundary value problems in quantum field theory. "This can't be right," he muttered, running the simulation again. Dr. Harrington looked up from the paper he was grading. "Problem?" "Not exactly." Elijah turned the laptop around. "My algorithm just reduced the computational complexity of this quantum simulation from exponential to polynomial time. But that should be impossible according to current theory." Dr. Harrington set aside his work and studied Elijah's screen with growing intensity. "Walk me through your approach." For the next hour, Elijah explained his methodology, a novel application of non-Euclidean geometry to quantum algorithms. As he spoke, Dr. Harrington's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement. "This is unprecedented," he said finally. "If these results hold up under peer review, you've just made a significant breakthrough in quantum computing theory." "Really?" Despite his confidence in mathematics, Elijah still struggled to believe his work could have important real-world implications. "Really?" Dr. Harrington leaned back in his chair. "I think it's time we prepared this for publication." "Publication? In a journal?" "The Journal of Quantum Information Processing, specifically. They're hosting a conference next month in Boston." "Perfect timing." Elijah's heart raced. "Wouldn't I need to present it? In person?" "That's generally how these things work, yes." The thought of standing before a room of established mathematicians and computer scientists, explaining his work, defending his methods, made Elijah's stomach clench. "I don't think I can do that, Dr. Harrington." "Why not? You understand the material better than anyone." "It's not that." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. I'm not good at speaking in front of people. Especially people who will be looking at me like I don't belong." Dr. Harrington's expression softened. "Elijah, do you know how many times I've seen you explain complex mathematical concepts to Dr. Washington's undergraduate students? You have a natural teaching ability." "That's different. They're just regular students. And conference attendees are just regular mathematicians. Albeit with more impressive titles and larger egos." Dr. Harrington smiled. "If it helps, Dr. Washington and I will both be there. And your mother and brother, if they'd like to attend." The mention of his family reminded Elijah how much had changed in 6 months. His mother had been able to reduce her work schedule thanks to his research assistantship, which paid better than his custodial position. Marcus was now receiving tutoring from an undergraduate mathematics student, arranged by Dr. Washington, who recognized and encouraged his abilities rather than punishing them. "I'll think about it," Elijah said. A week later, Elijah's paper was submitted and accepted with unusual speed. Dr. Harrington explained that the review committee had been extremely impressed by the work, particularly when they learned the author's age. As the conference approached, Elijah dedicated himself to preparing his presentation. Dr. Washington helped him create slides, while Aisha Okafor, who had become something of a mentor herself, conducted mock Q&A sessions to prepare him for potential challenges. 3 days before the conference, as Elijah was leaving the mathematics building, a familiar figure stood waiting near the entrance. "Ms. Whitley." Elijah stopped cold, his body instinctively tensing. His former teacher looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than he remembered. Her blonde hair was still pulled back in its severe bun, but her expression seemed uncertain. "Elijah Jackson," she said, with a tight smile. "I heard you were here. What do you want?" The words came out more harshly than he'd intended. "I wanted to congratulate you," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Your work is causing quite a stir in mathematics education circles. I always knew you had potential." Elijah stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You knew I had potential? You beat me with a ruler when I corrected your mistake. You told the principal I was disruptive and disrespectful." Ms. Whitley glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with his directness. "That's a rather dramatic interpretation of events. I was simply maintaining classroom discipline. And clearly, the experience didn't harm your educational development." Anger rose in Elijah, not the helpless anger he'd felt as her student, but something clearer, more focused. My back still hurts every day from what you did. I still have nightmares about being humiliated in front of my classmates. Don't stand there and pretend you supported my development. Well, Ms. Whitley seemed flustered. In any case, I'm attending the conference this weekend. I thought perhaps you might acknowledge my role in your education during your presentation. After all, I was your first advanced mathematics teacher. Elijah couldn't believe her audacity. Acknowledge you? For what? For making me hide my abilities? For physically assaulting me when I demonstrated knowledge you didn't have? That's enough, Elijah. Dr. Harrington's voice came from behind him. He hadn't heard the professor approach. Ms. Whitley, I presume? Yes, and you are. Dr. Victor Harrington, Elijah's mentor. His tone was coldly professional. May I ask why you're on campus speaking to my student? I was simply reconnecting with a former pupil, Ms. Whitley replied, her smile strained. Elijah and I have history. Yes, I'm aware of your history, Dr. Harrington said. Including the medical records documenting Elijah's back injury, which coincidentally occurred the same day as your classroom incident. The color drained from Ms. Whitley's face. I don't know what he's told you, but he's told me nothing. Elijah has been remarkably restrained about the abuse he suffered. Others at Dorchester High were more forthcoming when I inquired. This is absurd. I came here as a professional courtesy. No, Dr. Harrington interrupted. You came hoping to associate yourself with Elijah's success. That won't be happening. He turned to Elijah. Your mother is waiting in my office to discuss final conference arrangements. Elijah nodded, relief washing over him at the interruption. Goodbye, Ms. Whitley, Dr. Harrington said dismissively, guiding Elijah past her. As they walked away, Elijah felt a weight lifting, as if confronting his former tormentor had loosened something that had been tightly bound inside him. Are there really medical records? He asked quietly. Your mother kept them, Dr. Harrington replied. She never believed your story about falling during basketball practice, but she respected your desire not to pursue the matter. He paused. She brought them when I mentioned Ms. Whitley had registered for the conference. Why would she do that? Because your mother is a wise woman who understands that sometimes, the past must be confronted before the future can be fully embraced. 3 days later, standing at the podium before hundreds of mathematicians and computer scientists, Elijah glanced at his family in the front row. His mother's eyes shone with pride. Marcus gave him a thumbs up. Dr. Harrington and Dr. Washington sat nearby, ready to support him if needed. Taking a deep breath, Elijah began his presentation. Ms. Whitley sat in the back row, but this time, he wasn't afraid to meet her gaze. Good afternoon, he said, his voice steady. My name is Elijah Jackson, and today I'll be presenting a new approach to reducing computational complexity in quantum algorithms. The applause following Elijah's presentation was thunderous. Dr. Harrington had warned him that academic audiences were typically reserved, even for groundbreaking work, but the excited buzz in the auditorium suggested his algorithm had struck a chord with the mathematical community. As Elijah fielded questions, his initial nervousness giving way to confident, precise responses, he noticed Ms. Whitley making her way toward the microphone in the center aisle. His stomach tightened, but he maintained his composure. Yes, the woman in the blue suit, the moderator directed, pointing to Ms. Whitley. She cleared her throat, speaking with the artificial sweetness Elijah remembered all too well. Elijah, as your former mathematics teacher, I'm curious about the educational foundations that led to this remarkable work. Could you share how your early mathematics instruction influenced your development? The auditorium fell silent. Elijah knew exactly what she wanted, public acknowledgement, a chance to attach herself to his success. For a moment, he considered giving her what she wanted, just to avoid conflict. Then he remembered the constant pain in his back. The nights he'd spent cleaning Harvard's floors while nursing both physical and emotional wounds. The mathematical talent nearly extinguished by her cruelty. My early mathematical development, he began carefully, was largely self-directed. I was fortunate to have access to library books and online resources that allowed me to pursue advanced concepts outside the classroom setting. Ms. Whitley's smile faltered. But surely your teachers recognized and nurtured your talent. From the corner of his eye, Elijah saw his mother tense. Dr. Washington leaned forward slightly. Dr. Harrington's expression remained impassive, but his eyes conveyed a clear message: this is your moment. Handle it as you see fit. Actually, Elijah said, his voice gaining strength, my formal education was often an obstacle rather than a support. When I attempted to engage with advanced concepts, I was frequently discouraged or even punished. A murmur ran through the audience. That's a rather serious accusation, Ms. Whitley said, her voice hardening. As your former teacher, I always encouraged academic excellence. Something snapped inside Elijah. After months of healing, of building confidence in Harvard's supportive environment, he found himself unwilling to participate in this fiction. Ms. Whitley, he said directly, abandoning the pretense that this was a general discussion, you physically assaulted me with a ruler when I corrected a mistake in your presentation of the quadratic formula. You threatened my academic future when I demonstrated knowledge beyond what you were teaching. The chronic pain I still experience is a direct result of your actions. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Ms. Whitley's face flushed scarlet. That's a lie, she exclaimed. This is outrageous. I would never. We have the medical records, Dr. Harrington interrupted, standing from his seat. And statements from other faculty members at Dorchester High who were aware of the incident but afraid to come forward. Your attempt to intimidate this young man into silence ends today. The conference moderator looked alarmed. Perhaps we should return to the mathematical discussion. No, Dr. Washington interjected, also rising. This is precisely the discussion we need to have. How many brilliant minds from underserved communities have been silenced by educators who feel threatened by students who outshine them? How many Elijah Jacksons never made it to Harvard because their talents were punished rather than nurtured? Ms. Whitley looked frantically around the room, finding no sympathy in the sea of shocked faces. This is defamation. I'll sue. Please do, Sophia Jackson said calmly, speaking for the first time. She held up a manila envelope. We'll be happy to present these records in court. The moderator, recognizing the situation was beyond salvaging, attempted to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a 15-minute break before the next presentation. As the audience filed out, buzzing with discussion, Elijah remained at the podium, suddenly uncertain. Had he ruined his moment of professional triumph with this personal confrontation? Dr. Harrington approached, followed by Dr. Washington and Elijah's family. I'm sorry, Elijah began. I didn't mean to turn the presentation into. Don't apologize, Dr. Harrington interrupted. What happened here today was long overdue. Ms. Whitley and others like her need to understand that their actions have consequences. But the algorithm, my research, is brilliant and was well received. This incident doesn't diminish that. Dr. Washington placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. In fact, I've already had 3 colleagues approach me about potential applications of your work. Sophia embraced her son. I'm so proud of you. Not just for your mathematics, but for finding your voice. Marcus, who had witnessed the entire exchange, looked up at his brother with newfound admiration. That was awesome. You stood up to her. As they exited the auditorium, Dr. Harrington pulled Elijah aside. There's someone who wants to meet you. He gestured toward a distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit. Elijah, this is Dr. James Wilson. The Harvard department chair, who had been so skeptical of Elijah's abilities, extended his hand. Remarkable presentation, Mr. Jackson. Truly remarkable. I wonder if you might consider meeting with the full department when we return to campus. There's a special scholarship program I believe you should be considered for. The Montgomery Fellowship? Dr. Harrington asked, raising an eyebrow. Precisely. Dr. Wilson nodded. I think we can all agree that Mr. Jackson's talents warrant our most prestigious undergraduate opportunity. As Dr. Wilson walked away, Elijah turned to Dr. Harrington. "What just happened?" The professor smiled. "What happened is that you didn't just prove a mathematical theorem today. You proved something far more important, that you belong in this world, on your own terms, without compromise or apology." For the first time since that day in Ms. Whitley's classroom, Elijah stood completely straight, his back momentarily free from pain, his mind clear, his future unfurling before him like an elegant mathematical proof, complex but beautiful, challenging but ultimately solvable. 2 years later, Elijah Jackson stood at the front of a small classroom at Dorchester High School, watching students file in for the Saturday Mathematics Enrichment program he'd founded with part of his Montgomery Fellowship stipend. "Good morning, everyone," he greeted the group of 20 teenagers, all from underserved Boston neighborhoods, all with mathematical potential that had gone largely unrecognized in the traditional school system. Marcus, now 14 and already taking pre-calculus courses online, helped distribute materials as the students settled in. "Today we're going to explore some applications of calculus in quantum computing," Elijah explained. "But first, I want to introduce a special guest." Dr. Darius Washington entered, carrying a stack of brochures. "Hello, future mathematicians," he said with a warm smile. "I'm here to tell you about Harvard's new Pathways to STEM Excellence program. It's designed specifically for students like you, who have exceptional talents that might not be reflected in traditional academic metrics." One girl raised her hand hesitantly. "Do you have to have perfect grades to apply?" "Not at all," Dr. Washington assured her. "We're looking for creative mathematical thinking and problem-solving abilities, exactly what Mr. Jackson has been helping you develop in this program." As Dr. Washington continued his presentation, Elijah observed the students' reactions, noting the gradual transformation from skepticism to cautious hope. He recognized that expression, the same one he'd worn when Dr. Harrington had first offered him an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. The Pathways program had been Elijah's brainchild, developed during his second year at Harvard. Now a junior with a double major in mathematics and computer science, he'd become an unofficial ambassador for educational equity within the university. The program aimed to identify mathematically talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds and provide them with mentorship, resources, and a clear path to higher education. After the workshop, as the students dispersed, Sophia arrived to pick up her sons. She now worked just one job, a supervisor position at the hospital with better hours and benefits, and had recently enrolled in night classes at community college, inspired by her eldest son's academic journey. "How were your students today?" she asked, embracing Elijah. "Brilliant," he replied. "There's a girl in the group, Zara, who reminds me of myself at her age. She's already developing her own approaches to the problems we give them." "Another phantom mathematician in the making?" Dr. Washington asked with a smile. "Maybe. But hopefully one who won't have to clean floors at night to access a proper education." Later that evening, as Elijah prepared for a family dinner celebrating his mother's completion of her first college semester, his phone rang with a familiar name, Dr. Harrington. "Elijah, good news," his mentor began without preamble. "The Journal of Computational Mathematics has accepted your latest paper. And they want you as a keynote speaker at their summer conference." "That's great," Elijah replied, genuinely pleased but no longer overwhelmed by such opportunities. They had become, if not routine, at least familiar milestones in his academic journey. "There's more," Dr. Harrington continued. "Dr. Wilson wants to discuss your graduate school plans when you return from break. MIT and Princeton have both expressed interest, but he's pushing hard for you to stay at Harvard." Elijah smiled. The same department chair who had once questioned whether a janitor belonged in Harvard's hallowed mathematics program now considered him a prized asset to be retained. "I'll think about it," Elijah promised, though his heart was already leaning toward Harvard, not out of loyalty to the institution, but to the mentors who had changed his life. After the call, Elijah joined his family in their new apartment, still modest, but in a better neighborhood, with enough space for everyone to have their own bedroom. Marcus was setting the table while Sophia put the finishing touches on dinner. "Everything okay?" his mother asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Everything's perfect," Elijah replied honestly. I was just thinking about how much has changed. And how much hasn't, Sophia added with a knowing smile. You're still my boy who sees the world through numbers. Just with a bigger platform now. As they sat down to dinner, Elijah felt the familiar twinge in his back, a phantom pain from Ms. Whitley's ruler that would likely never completely disappear. The difference was that it no longer defined him or limited him. It had become, strangely, almost a gift, a physical reminder of the obstacles he'd overcome and his responsibility to ensure others wouldn't face the same barriers. I've been thinking, he said as they ate, about expanding the Saturday program to more schools. Maybe even creating a summer institute for students like Zara. Always planning, always building, his mother said with pride. That mind of yours never stops, does it? The mind is like a mathematical function, Elijah replied, quoting Dr. Harrington. It grows more elegant the more problems it solves. Marcus rolled his eyes. Even at dinner, you talk in equations. They all laughed, the sound filling their home with a joy that no equation could fully capture, but that Elijah understood was the most important variable in his success story, the constant support of family who believed in him, even when the world didn't. As they ate, Elijah found himself momentarily distracted by a pattern in the arrangement of dishes on the table, his mind automatically calculating angles and distances. Some things never changed. But now, instead of hiding his mathematical way of seeing the world, he embraced it, not just as an academic talent, but as the unique perspective that allowed him to transform obstacles into opportunities, both for himself and for those who would follow the path he was helping to clear. Dear friend, talent knows no color, class, or circumstance, but opportunity is not distributed equally. Elijah's story reminds us that brilliant minds exist in every community, often hidden behind barriers of prejudice and poverty. Every day, potential mathematical geniuses are silenced in classrooms where they should be nurtured. Let's change this reality. By sharing this video and subscribing to our channel, you help amplify voices that deserve to be heard. Each like and subscription supports stories that challenge stereotypes and inspire change. Together, we can build a world where every Elijah has the chance to shine. Subscribe now, because representation matters.